The president has authority to withhold appropriated funds under law, including military assistance to Ukraine, while considering a deferral or rescission of those funds. Hello, this is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button. Today we're going to be talking about President Trump's decision to temporarily freeze Ukrainian military assistance, about $250 million worth of it, in mid-July. The funds were ultimately released on September 11th, and now Democrats in Congress want to impeach President Trump and remove him from office for even considering either rescinding or deferring these funds. Now, one of the elements of this is a GAO review has been requested by Senator Chris Van Hollen. And the question I think he's asking is if the president is considering whether to defer or rescind military assistance to a foreign country, but has not yet made a decision to do so under the Impoundment Control Act, is he required to notify Congress? Van Hollen suggesting that yes, even if you're considering doing it and you're going to put an OMB freeze in place while you make that consideration, you need to notify Congress. Now, there's a dispute here clearly about what the law of the Impoundment Control Act and what apportionment law, fiscal apportionment law, would provide for in the case of notifying Congress. Now, these questions also came amid a temporary freeze of State Department and U.S. foreign aid spending in August, and $250 million of military assistance in Ukraine in July. Now, as far as the foreign aid, State Department, U.S. aid spending goes, a memorandum was sent from the OMB to State Department and USAID, and it says all previously apportioned unobligated resources shall be unavailable for obligation until 3 business days after the Office of Management and Budget receives an accounting from your agencies of the current outstanding unobligated resources. So here, OMB was saying that these foreign aid accounts have unobligated balances in them from 2018 and 2019. Please account for these. And they put a temporary freeze in place. And what they cited was 31 USC 1512 in terms of giving the authority to conduct the freeze. And this is apportionment and reserves. What it says in part is, except as provided in this subchapter, an appropriation available for obligation for a definite period shall be apportioned to prevent obligation or expenditure at a rate that would indicate a necessity for a deficiency or supplemental appropriation for the period. An appropriation for an indefinite period, an authority to make obligations by contract before appropriation shall be apportioned to achieve the most effective and economical use. An apportionment may be reapportioned under this section. So they put a temporary freeze in place for foreign aid spending, and this occurred about the same time that they were also doing a freeze of the U.S. military assistance to Ukraine. Now, and Democrats want to remove Trump from office over this. So the under 2 USC 684 and 2 USC 683, that's the Impoundment Control Act, the president has the power to propose deferring funds or rescinding them altogether, subject to congressional approval. The question here appears to be what obligation the president has to spend the money while considering such a deferral or rescission. So these are discretionary funds, in this case, DOD resources. Can the president say, hold off on that, we're considering whether or not we're going to rescind this? Now, OMB did cite 31 USC 1512 to conduct apportionments, which the White House cited as the same authority for doing the 3-day spending freeze for foreign aid to State Department and USAID. And in its letter. So they were looking at unobligated balances. And at the time, a question posed by critics was whether the funds could be withheld beyond the end of the fiscal year on September 30, while Congress was considering a proposed rescission, effectively preventing funds from being spent or expiring prior to Congress's consideration. Now, last year, this actually came up. GAO had asked Office of Management and Budget General Counsel Mark Paoletta for his views on the question, and he submitted a reply to him, basically stating that the administration could do that they could freeze funding before the end of the fiscal year if it's unobligated, and in lieu of a rescission by Congress. And then if the fiscal year ends, then the monies would just simply be unspent. They would be returned to the Treasury. And here's what the general counsel at OMB said was, quote, the text of the Impoundment Control Act clearly allows the president to propose and withhold funds at any time in a fiscal year. In addition to the unambiguous statutory language, there is a bipartisan historical precedent for the president to withhold funds at any time of the fiscal year, including in instances where funds proposed for rescission have lapsed prior to the expiration of the 45-day withholding period. Nonetheless, in December of 2018, GAO came back with an opinion that said that, quote, we conclude that the ICA does not permit the withholding of funds through their date of expiration. The statutory text and legislative history of the ICA, Supreme Court case law, and the overarching constitutional framework of the legislative and executive powers provide no basis to interpret the ICA as a mechanism by which the president may unilaterally abridge the enacted period of availability of a fixed period appropriation. Now, the opinion, of course, though, is non-binding by GAO, and in any event, it wasn't even at issue here. The context of OMB conducting a wider review of foreign aid packages, it's not unreasonable to suppose that the foreign military assistance to Ukraine was falling under a similar review. And Democrats appear ready to vote to impeach and remove Trump for even considering doing a rescission of the military's funding to Ukraine. What are they, warmongers? I mean, the president's not allowed to review a foreign aid package, a military assistance package in a country that's at civil war right now. You have pro-Russian forces in eastern Ukraine, pro-Kiev forces in western Ukraine, and they're fighting it out, and they've been doing so for 5 years. President Trump is attempting to, I believe, get a handle on the civil war so that it doesn't spill over into the rest of Europe, potentially getting NATO involved, potentially putting the U.S. versus Russia in a war, a hot war that would probably go nuclear. So I think trying to get a handle on that situation in Ukraine is probably a national security interest. And so clearly the president is trying to say, wait a second, should we be doing military assistance? He's allowed to review that question and then decide whether or not to do a rescission to Congress. In this case, they actually let the money go. They said, yeah, let's do the funding. It was released on September 11th. As far as the USAID and State Department foreign aid, that was released in early August. So they did the review and then they released the aid. So I don't see what the real question is here. And I'll leave you with the close here. Now, this all might be cause to request another opinion from GAO or to perhaps ham out a legal dispute in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia over the limits of fiscal apportionment and rescission laws. But that's not a high crime, a misdemeanor, treason, or bribery. It's a dispute between the branches of government, the executive branch and the legislative branch, over what the letter of the law means. So, you could probably have a federal court case to decide when is the president required to notify Congress about a freeze by OMB of foreign aid or military spending. In the end, however, no rescissions were ever sought, and certainly none carrying through the end of the fiscal year, and all the monies were ultimately spent, rendering the question moot. This is what Democrats want to overturn the 2016 election over? Come on. That's the commentary. This is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and have a good day.